to share with you how I taught my children to read using my experience as a elementary school teacher. 4 of my 7 years in the classroom were spent in the kindergarten classroom. I love that stage and the reading and learning to read stage. And it's really been fun to see how the way in which we taught it in the school was helpful, but also how that taught me some better ways to do it with my own children. I'll show you what I use with my son, not what we did in the public schools per se. You know, I was a kindergarten teacher, and then I was able to quit and be home with him long term, and I ended up somehow he ended up reading by 3 years old. And it wasn't because I was going crazy making him do stuff like for hours a day. It was, you know, just 5 minutes, maybe 15 altogether if you added up the little fun things I did with him in maybe 3 days a week, sometimes 5, and bam, you know. And I was just so amazed because in my experience, you don't learn the letters and sounds in kindergarten. I knew that some parents would teach your kids sooner, but I was just like, wow, this is amazing, like, you know. And so what I found is that learning letters and sounds doesn't have to be a big deal. It's really not that big of a deal. And then of course after the letters and sounds, you're like, okay, well let's learn to read. And then after you learn to read the, you know, the CVC words, consonant, vowel, consonant, you know, cat, bat, sat, and you know, pet, met, set, you know, short A, short E, short I, short O, short U, you know, it just, after that, you know, I can talk about the progress more in order, but you start to try to take a systematic approach and you realize, oh, well, I was going to go systematically and teach you this next step, but you're already reading beyond that. And it's amazing that reading, it's like once they get to a certain point, it just, bam, they just take off. And so sometimes we have to be careful that if we're following like a systematic program for phonics, you know, where you have like workbook pages they have to do, what's going to happen is they're sometimes, depending on the program, you know, it's going to take till like Explode the Code, book 7 for them to get on, you know, phonics concept that they were already reading, you know, in kindergarten or 1st grade. Then it becomes kind of like more for spelling, and then if it is for spelling, then you might as well be using a spelling program that doesn't just do phonics words, they also intermix some sight words or irregularly spelled words, some homophones, and it's actually geared towards spelling. It's amazing how they just take off. So let me not get on a bunny trail like I just did, but letters and sounds, I'm going to show you what we did then for beginning reading, and then after that how we quickly were able to take off and get out of that hamster wheel of systematic reading curriculums that aren't always a bad thing, but sometimes kill the joy of reading, because now they're telling what your child's reading or making them do this basically busy work depending on the child and their needs. But in most cases, I think it does kind of become busy work at some point when their reading exceeds or goes beyond, and it's like, I don't need to do this phonics worksheet anymore. Anyway, so let me show you what we did. So the first thing I'm going to show you is that we did letters and sounds. The main source I found that's helpful are letter and sounds cards. We teach upper and lower together at first. Keep those letters married together. Once they have them together, then you can still use those cards for review. Then you go ahead and separate them. Okay? And so how do we teach the letters? The most important part is the sound the letter makes. Yeah, right? I mean, we should know the name too, because then if you say write the letter O, and they're like, what's O? Ah. Oh yeah, O, ah. Okay. They need both the letter and sound, but of course the sound's the most important because that's how we decode, how we write, and how we read. So how I did it, there's a couple different ways. If I wanted to make it quick, it'd be O, big O, little O, ostrich. You could also just do O, ostrich. You could do O, ostrich. And so sometimes I make up little stories, you know. Big F, and I try to cover up the picture so they focus on the letters before I reveal the picture. Big F, little F. Frederick Fox fans himself. Okay, now I go through the cards and I do it quickly depending on their attention span. And here's the key. You want to go through all the letters every day quickly. 1 to 3 minutes. Bam, bam, bam. Because then, yes, what you can do is also have a few you're focusing on in this deck of cards. So maybe you're doing A, B, C first. And so every day you're going through all the cards quickly, because then by osmosis, by the time you get to W, maybe they already know W. and it makes things so much faster. They're getting that holistic. You want to do the wide part of the funnel, and then you want to do the narrow part of the funnel, which is then doing some focusing. Now, honestly, because I started so young, I only did the wide part of the funnel pretty much. And so it took a little longer doing it that way, but it's definitely, don't just do the narrow part of the funnel. Don't just, today's A, today's B, today's C, and by the time you get to Z, you weren't really consistently reviewing. The wide part of the funnel is the most important, because if you just do all the letters every day, then at some point you might kind of quiz them and realize, wow, they know almost all of them. Then you could keep doing all of them, but then go, okay, I know that when I quiz them, I put in this pile the cards that they struggled with. And so you would want to use the cards that are separate, because if you're assessing your child, you could informally kind of get an idea of which ones they know together. But once you've been doing this for a while, you want to then find out, well, maybe they really got big F, but they weren't really paying attention to the little f, and they're still struggling. And so then you want to every so often do a quizzing, make it a fun game, especially if you're doing it when you're younger than kindergarten, but even kindergarten. Maybe you can't even go through all the cards in one day. And so, make it a fun game, like, all right, you get to capture the letter, keep the letter, you got it, and then they keep that one. If they didn't get it, no big deal, you just put it on this side of you, and then this one's theirs. And then at the end, you count how many cards they got. And you have a little bag that maybe has a heart on it. Those are the ones they own, they really know it. And then maybe a hand is, I need help, so you put those cards, and you keep those little bags. And then now, you continue either reviewing with these cards or with these, and you can review from the heart bag, the ones they know, put those back, and then pick a few that they don't know to really focus in on. Okay, so you're doing the wide part of the funnel and the narrow part of the funnel. And so I would wait till you've, if you're already in kindergarten, go ahead and do that wide and narrow consistently. If you're doing it when they're really young, just do the wide part of the funnel. Don't worry about quizzing very often. Even in kindergarten, you could do it once a week, but if quizzing is stressful to them, even if you make it a game, you might not need to do it even that often. So that's letters and sounds. Now, I found that flashcards were quick and effective, but especially if you're teaching them in preschool, doing ABC book is quicker and it's more warm. Okay, so if you're snuggling on a couch with a book, it feels, warmer than some cards. But I did both, but I think because I taught mine when they're younger, I did it with the book. Now, this book could be visually overwhelming for any child, especially a small child. But this one is actually what I'm using right now with my 1 and my 4-year-old. My 4-year-old already knew her letters and sounds, also about 3.5 years old. But at that young age, when they do learn it, sometimes their brain's a little more jelly, right? Like they still can forget. So if you're not reviewing, that's a really big tip. Once your child does know those letters and sounds, whether they're in kindergarten or preschool, or if they just learned them at first, you need to keep reviewing for a good chunk after they've learned those letters and sounds, when you're in that beginning stage. So if this book is too overwhelming, you could have a book that reviews it in a less overwhelming way, which I don't have the book handy. It's in the room where my baby is sleeping, but it only has maybe 1 or 2 letters per page. But you do the same thing. Let's imagine this is a book. This is actually another set of cards, which is great if your child needs something bigger. Even if your child has perfect vision, sometimes the bigger makes them focus better, see it clearer, and help. So that's another tip. Bigger could be better for some kids. Less busy could be better for some kids. So let's say this is a book. We do the same thing. Big B, little b, barn. Okay? And you could cover pictures, you can trace, you can point. That's a key. You must be directing your child's eyes with your finger. Okay? Now, if you're teaching them before kindergarten especially, don't stress about having them have to say it. Don't stress about them having to touch or do or quiz. Just make it something where they're just being spoon-fed, okay? And trust me, they're getting it. Like I said, my kids had their letters and sounds down by 3, and my son was reading by 3. My daughter was reading by 3.5, but I always kind of slowed down when they started. If they didn't really feel like reading, I didn't want to push it too hard. So that's where it can be tricky, and I don't necessarily recommend learning the letters before kindergarten, or maybe learn it before kindergarten if you want to, but don't push them to read unless you feel that you can do it in a gentle enough way, or that they're ready or wanting to. And then they're also good for playing matching games. You maybe separate all, big A, B, C, and D, and then little A, B, C, and D, and then play matching game with just 4 or 5 of them. You wouldn't want to do that with 52 cards, right? We have 26 upper and 26 lower. And so you could just do that. But that's icing on the cake. If you just did the big funnel of review and then, maybe did some, quizzing where you separate what they know, what they don't know, that would probably be enough. Of course, instead of a book or cards, you could use a chart, but this is visually busy. So maybe if you're starting in kindergarten and you want them to be a little independent, they might enjoy just having a chart, just sometimes go, apple. And I like that this one shows the long sound too. Okay, so when I was doing letters and sounds, I didn't teach the long sound. If in the book it gave a picture clue, for example, that showed A, alligator, A, acorn, I went ahead and maybe did a little vowel review and said, oh, A is a vowel, it has two sounds. A says A and A, and then show it the picture clues. Or I might sing the little song, A, E, I, O, U, A, E, I, O, U, A, E, I, O, U. These are the vowels of the alphabet, of course, slower. And you could say A says A and A, E says E and E, I says I and I, O says O and A, U says U and A. But that'd be something I'd probably do more if I was doing all of them on the magnetic board later on. With the letters, just quickly, use those picture clues. If you see a G, girl, and then it also has giraffe, you could point out, oh, sometimes G, if they're old enough to be ready for that, says a soft sound, J, like the letter J. Or you can just brush right over that. The main thing is just know the short sounds of all the letters, not necessarily the long yet, unless you want to just expose them to that. Okay, because when you get to that point in reading where you're teaching them to read words with long vowels, then that'll come into play more. You can always build in, when you're in the letter sound stage, you can build in phonemic awareness activities like rhyming and orally segmenting and blending, meaning if I say k-at, they say cat. If I say chick-ick, and they say chicken, so they can orally blend the word. Or, this is a little bit harder, you could try, after they are good at that, orally segmenting the words. If I say cat, they can break it down into k-at, okay? Not 100% necessary, but I think that pre-reading skill while they're learning the letters and sounds might help them when they actually are done with letters and sounds and ready to read. And the rhyming, doing nursery rhymes and maybe some oral rhyming games. I say hat, you say bat, and they think of a word that rhymes, or you do silly words, So that's letters and sounds. All right, the next step, I didn't go right into Bob books with my son, but before you go into the books, they might get overwhelmed with, now they need to understand that letters are different from words, and words make sentences. And so they might look at this and that just looks like a bunch of jumbo mumbo, okay? So, before you get into reading books, you might want to focus on just the word families, or the CBC words. So CBC words are taught well in word families. So the first word, your word families are your short A, short E, short I, short O, short U, your 5 vowels. You want to focus on the words that have A as at, E as I as it, O as and U as okay? And so I have a sheet I can give you that tells all the basic word families for each of the vowels, okay? So let's say the first word family I always started with was the at family, short A. And so, again, this might be a good time before each session when you're, went from, now you're just reviewing the letters every day quickly. They know them. Now, your new thing is you're not quite ready for books. Maybe you just understand, oh, I can put letters together to make words. And so, you could start with their name, teaching them how to, write and spell their name. But we're going to go ahead and talk about this. So, at. So, I can make up stories, I was wearing a hat. Okay, it's very important that we are directing the child with our finger. Of course, if your child's older and they're ready, they can begin to do some of the directing. All right, hat. And then, you're kind of producing, and eventually they can start jumping in. Or you might even play a game where you pretend like, you're struggling, and they're helping you, and you can just make it fun. And then you can, you will do more quickly, okay? So hat. And then I was wearing a hat, and then I went outside and saw a bat, right? And so you could slow down as they get more ready and they start doing the sounding up. In the beginning, you might just be modeling. When teaching CVC words, you can teach a child to sound out pointing to each phoneme or each letter or each sound. But then you can also use an aid called onset and rhyme, meaning the first letter is the onset And the part that doesn't change as you keep making new words is called the rhyme. Okay, so b-at, and then k-at. This takes a lot of stress off the students. At. Once they recognize this part is at all the time, all they have to really do is just change the first sound. That doesn't mean we won't encourage them to still go at, or intermix other practice where we change the medial, the middle sound, or the ending sound. But what it means is in the beginning, this builds their confidence and they're able to just quickly remember. So let's say, for example, your child's going app, and you can be like, and point out, what sound does T make? You can also say, we said cat, we said bat, now we say at, and they can use that rhyme to help them. During this time of learning how to blend words would be a good time to perhaps build in alternating between letter practice with the cards, or just at the start of each word reading session on the board, you could use a dry erase marker or magnetic letters and write the vowels at the top. And of course, write words with dry erase marker if you don't want to buy the magnets. And at the start, you could just sing A-E-I-O-U and have the child point, or you point. A-E-I-O-U, A-E-I-O-U. These are the vowels of the alphabet. The vowels make two sounds. They can say their name, A-E-I-O-U. And they can make a special short sound, ah, eh, I, and you could even have the child practice that, I, or you might wait and just focus on, one vowel at a time as you do the word families. Okay, and so on and so forth. And eventually what you're going to do is try a new word family. You're still in short A, and. Okay, and you could continue with short A families the same way, maybe each word family gets a week, or it could be that your child's already okay, I got this, and it might just be a day. Depends on the child, you just play it by ear. But if you find, okay, well, hey, they're kind of got the at, go ahead and dip into the next word family. Or if you moved into and words, you put up ran, and they're just quickly zooming through, it's time to dip into the next bucket. You could continue to learn short A, app, and in other short A families, but this is where it's nice that you can customize, because if you're doing a phonics program, depending on which one, they might just make the kid drag through, but they're ready to already be reading something else, because the brain is an amazing machine. Some of us just quickly oh, I got the concept, now I can read anything, pretty quickly after a little bit. And then some kids need to slow down more, especially when I teach them when they're younger. They need a little more time for that blending. They're still struggling, they're still or they're still skipping sounds or getting confused or reading backwards. That's so normal and fine. But once they get to that point where they are just blending, they got the concept, that's where you can begin to go, okay, short A family was really our launching point. It got my kid to where they can blend. So then you can begin to dip into some other short vowels, short E, I, O, or U words. And again, I have a list of word families for each of the short vowels. And so you might, once they got that blending concept through doing the short A family, maybe it was the first short A family that they got it, or maybe you had to go through, all the short A families before they got it, however it worked out. Once, you feel like, or even sooner, that you want to just experiment, you could be like, oh, let me see what happens. We've been doing short A, here's hat, but let's see, all this time we've been just changing the initial sound and keeping it as add, or maybe we were changing the ending sound and doing and words for a while, whatever the case, but you haven't really tried to change that sound. And it really could be pretty early on you want to experiment, or maybe after they've kind of got that blending and putting the sounds together without help. And so then you might just be like, see what happens, right? Go ahead and dip into short E or short I or short O. Yeah, they're gonna get B and D mixed up sometimes. They might get P and Q mixed up, okay, right? They're gonna get other ones mixed up that might surprise you sometimes, and that's normal. At this time, you could move straight into Bob Books or take a short period to teach your child the concept of how words come together to make sentences. This is also a great opportunity to begin building their sight word knowledge. At the same time, choose 5 sight words. Make sentences with them that are repetitive. I can see a cat. I can see a dog. They can hop on each word with a character like a Paw Patrol toy. The last word is phonetic, and you can keep changing that word while keeping the rest of the sentence the same, so they build confidence. This is your stop sign, your period or question mark, and your green light go is your capital letter. Each card is like a car. You want spaces between them so they don't crash. After a little while, you can stop doing this, go ahead to Bob Books, but keep building your sight word card deck. I'll talk more about that shortly. Once they can blend words on the board at all, they can start to get some practice reading words in a sentence and seeing spaces. Now, you could just do the same concept. Dot has a cat. Dot has a cat. And, doing some mix of modeling, or if you feel like you want to keep working on the board till they can do it more independently, but whatever the case, just slow and steady, learning to point, sound out. If they're still getting confused about, because the spaces aren't big enough and they're like not seeing individual words, you could just test it. Like, is that what the confusion is? They can circle how many words are in the sentence and have them circle each one. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just kind of give yourself an idea if that's throwing them off. This does have smaller print, so little things like that can be hard for kids sometimes. Or, it might not be a big deal. So just, be aware of some possible anticipation of some possible things that might, throw them off. We actually went straight into set 2 because I hadn't really gotten into Bob Books yet and had already been using my own books, combining sight words and CVC words that we were learning. But for you, I would say logically, go ahead, since you don't have the paper books, and you start after they have the CVC words and you start introducing the sight words, start just reading Bob Books and continue building their sight word bank around 100 or 120 sight words. They're going to be able to get to the books they enjoy faster. And so the way that you're going to do that is pick a list and just know that these words, whether they're called power words or sight words, dolce, fry, they're all just words that they see a lot in print, and by knowing them, they get more automatic. It doesn't mean they can't use their phonetic skills, but it means that these words could be phonetic based, or mostly words that aren't necessarily able to be sounded out, like where or what. And so just knowing them by heart really helps. Phonics is still extremely important, of course. By the time he was done with this set 2 of Bob Books, he had, a lot of sight words down. A lot of these they'll have down already if you just test them quickly with the phonetic ones, like if they've already can sound out 3-letter words. Cards of the ones they know in one bag, and the cards are the ones they don't know in the other, so they always have your review ones and then your ones you're working on. Alternately, you could just learn right from the word list rather than making cards, and the child can see which ones they have a sticker for, or maybe which ones are checked or highlighted. And which ones are not, and you could, if they're more self-directed, they can practice the ones they don't know, or you could guide them to do so. Go from set 1 to set 2, and during set 1, I'd say take a break, from the magnetic letters, but when you're in set 2, you could go back to magnetic letters. This is CVC focused, like cat, hat, bat, sat, and with a few sight words, but you could start preparing them for 4-letter words and start teaching them a little ahead, with blends. So you could teach them the L blends, the R blends, the consonant blends, with 2 consonants together, and then the diagraphs, which are not phonetic, but you just have to know it's cha, fa, sha, tha, what, and so on. And so when you teach them, it's bull, burr, col. It's not blah, bruh. We don't put the schwa on the end. And so, again, you could learn these, and then you could actually, instead of, making your CVC words like you had been, you can now make 4-letter words, CVC words that begin with a blend, sk, at, and you could have, your diagraphs and make, words with sh, cha, tha, what, as well as the blends, and kind of prepare them. And again, you're continuing to build your sight word bank. Then by Fun with Pets, it starts off real easy. It's like a review. They're going to now be introduced to the next concept, which is long vowels. And so they're going to learn all those vowel pairs, with 2 vowels together, and AY and EY and the different combinations. That's where, you could take a break from the board again, or now when you're doing the board, you can mix short vowels, blends, digraphs, and you could even do some long vowels using words you saw in the book. So maybe you're like, they need a little more practice than the book provided. They're teaching them that if I have, one vowel, bat, and I add an E to the end, now it's bait. And you could just kind of make up your own little words to practice, short vowels and long vowels and blends and digraphs, or not, it's optional, but I think it does boost them. So now you're done with fun with pets. The next logical step might be to go to Abeka 1.2 if you did like me and stopped Bob Books and moved into Abeka. But what I found is my son really was not excited about reading at this point. It was kind of like something he needed to do. And so I found that moving into step into reading books, similar to I Can Read, but maybe a little easier in some ways, was helping him to get excited about reading. Because we front-loaded with sight words, we front-loaded with blends, and he's solid with CVC, and this even taught him the long vowels. Once you have those, you really don't have to go through a step-by-step phonics program anymore. And let me show you why. When you open up a book like this, first of all, it's going to have not a systematic approach like Abeka or the other programs, but at this point, it's okay. They can handle it. So it could have all kinds of concepts you haven't taught yet. For example, inflectional endings. You haven't taught them maybe ing, but you could simply say, ooh, remember that sight word? Because guess what? That was one of the sight words you learned. And you cover up that, and they say, look, and then you teach them ing. And then you get to AR. Oh, I haven't taught them R control vowels, which, by the way, you don't need to know that that's called an R control vowel, although you could use a chart like this if you want, but you really, at this point, like I said, just learn to read by reading. And so you could just teach them, oh, AR says R, and there's a blend. You already learned blends, stars. You get here, oops, I didn't teach them compound words. Well, they already know blends, but they already learned long vowels, with bossy E from this book. And so now they didn't learn, soft C. And so it's just now logical. Sp-ac. Oh, that doesn't make sense. Did you know C can say S, space, and we know E makes A say A, and so on. You could, if this is too big, you could chunk the word, cover up ship. They get space. Now cover up this side. Then they read that. Again, they already front loaded with your blends and diagraphs. So they just remind them, oh, what does SH say? Shh. Spaceship. And believe me, because this book is so high interest and you front loaded all this stuff, suddenly they're going to read words you just were like, whoa, I didn't teach them that yet. You didn't have to. The brain is an amazing thing. And when you're interested in something, suddenly the pictures, the context, and all these things you've taught them, and you're going to go ahead and continue teaching them because this is still a guided reading time. This is still an early reader book. They're going to get it. They're going to begin to read things that you never taught them, or that you are going to just teach them as you go now. Now, if you want to know the exact level, they don't give it to you. They give you kind of a idea, and it's very different from like Abeka. It doesn't follow, a systematic approach. But if you go to arbookfind.com, the accelerated reader program, I think, is the best leveling system because they have thousands of titles, and they will tell you what grade level it is. For example, if you type this one in, it says it's a level 1.1, which actually would logically follow this, even though it doesn't really follow their approach. And so 1.1 means that it's a first grade, first month. Okay, and this one was leveled at a 1.7. That means first grade, 7th month of first grade. And so logically following, if it had said that another book I picked were a 3.4, that would mean 3rd grade, 4th month. And there's 9 months in a school year. So you start with 1.1 and you end with a 1.9, and then you go to a 2.0 for 2nd grade. And so it worked out really well for us. So you can do it. And so, now once they're reading those books, now you're going to do a combination of guided and independent. It's more about just every day you sit down and they read to you a little bit, whatever the stamina is that they're at. You just kind of try to stretch them a little more and a little more. It could be one book, it could be a few pages, it could be for 20 minutes, it could be for 30 minutes eventually, but in the beginning stages, it's usually small. And as you're listening to them read, you let them finish to the end of the page and then you correct the errors, or maybe they're okay with you correcting them a little more often, but it's good to kind of hold back and let them correct themselves and teach them to try to self-correct as much as possible and just be super positive and super encouraging. Remember, reading doesn't have to be long or intense or a bunch of busy work. Learn to read by reading. And I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions or thoughts, if I didn't make sense, please let me know in the comments. I'd be glad to clarify anything. And thank you for liking and subscribing.